Terry, how do you pronounce your last name?
McEvoy?
McEvoy. Oh, that's
McEvoy.
fairly easy.
Yeah.
Welcome to Kevin Unscripted.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. It's so pleasure meeting you and for you to open your home up for us to come here and record this episode.
Cool. Yeah, it's something different. Never been here before to do it. So
Have you ever done anything like this?
no, never.
It's I think it's an experience that I think a lot of people hopefully get a lot of enjoyment out of, and this area is nice for me to come down to because yesterday I kind of toured around, and you live in an amazing area on the island.
We like it for sure. Yeah. I'd always hoped to be able to retire back onto the island here. So
Yeah, out of all the places that you lived in, throughout your life, this was where you kind of decided to kind of nestle in and make it a long-term home.
yep. Yeah. Earlier as a young kid growing up, that we lived in Sydney for a few years. So I'd been to the island, liked it, and very nice. So
Well, I can see why.
yeah.
Beautiful area. I've been on the island a few times, but I haven't really hit all the places. So this is my first time in this area. But why don't I introduce you to the viewers so everyone has an idea of who you are. You've got a book called No Ordinary Days that I'll show everybody here. An Aviator story. And back history on yourself is you were born in the late 1950s. Terry is a true aviation legend who has not only followed his father's footsteps, but also a part of a family lineage that continues down to his grandchildren. Terry boasts over 28,000 flight hours and has experience with 175 diverse aircraft types, which include bush and float planes, Lear jets, and helicopters. Terry's career spans from his early days as an aircraft maintenance engineer, flying in the far northern regions of Canada, to tracing the southern coastlines on Vancouver Island. From undertaking international and global flights in one of the world's fastest business jets, Terry's adventures are a testament to his exceptional career, as outlined in his book, No Ordinary Days, an Aviator's Story. He has accumulated an impressive array of experiences, surviving the Arctic terrain, navigating the challenging coastal landscape, and traveling to countries all over the world. His stories of survival, problem-solving, and achievements are a testament to his dedication to aviation. And one other thing I thought I'd kind of touch on, which I thought was neat, was a foreword from your book here, and this was from Kevin
Maurer. Yeah.
Meyer. Just the first paragraph, I almost continues on with what I just read out there, but in his words, not many people can write a book like this. In the future, I doubt that anyone will be able to. Flying careers naturally tend to get challenged in certain directions or down certain paths. For someone to experience the sheer variety and breadth of aviation that Terry has is almost unheard of. From bush planes to corporate jets, from biplanes constructed in his garage to helicopters, a passion for flying is the thread that ties it all together. And that passion defines an aviator instead of a pilot. Aviators write the best books. And then in your one other part in here in the introduction, you've already addressed, I guess, the first question, why I love to fly. And in your words, those who understand, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't understand, no explanation is possible. So that's, I think, a jump into, I guess, the first part of aviation. And one of the questions I had for you was, I guess in addition to how you got into it, but the sheer array of different talents that you were able to accumulate over your career, like Kevin said, is an unheard of. I think most people career paths tend to kind of zero in one area or another, especially when it comes to being able to hop from a plane to a helicopter. I mean, not too many pilots kind of jump from one end to the other, do they?
No, it's basically two different types of flying. They're so far apart that not often would you end up with a company that does both things where you could do that? I mean, because I had been in both types of flying, I was lucky for 10 years of my career to work for BC Forest Products, where we operated a jet, a float plane, and a helicopter. So you could
pretty much go to work and jump on any one of them.
Yeah, some of them. Some days you might fly all three of them in one day.
Wow.
And not everybody wants to do it, but I was always interested in flying. And like Kevin said, we've talked about it many times, that there's a difference between aviators and pilots. That they both fly an airplane, but a lot of pilots, it's just a job to them, like driving a bus or anything. You go, you fly your legs. At the end of the day, you're done. Where most aviators are interested in anything they're flying, all aspects of it, what it does, why you're doing it. Yeah, so.
Well, it started for you just from what you had outlined in your book, your and what we outlined just now. It's in the family blood, and your I guess passion started from heavy influence, from what I could tell in your book, from your father.
It was, yeah. I was born into a family where my father was a World War II pilot, and my father always wanted to get overseas during the war, but he got singled out as being a good instructor, so they kept him instructing, and it worked out okay for him. But right after the war, it was hard for a lot of those guys to find jobs, because there was more people looking for flying jobs than there were jobs available. So, but yeah, if it's in your genes, I'm not really sure. But right from an early age, I had an interest in it. All right, so.
Well, one of the things that you had to address as in your youth and an interest in aviation, I guess, was the fact that you wore glasses at that time, and that's not really something that in the military world, at least, anyways, is something that passes the threshold for.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the military back in the World War II days. You had to have 20/20 vision without glasses to qualify for aircrew training, and that's why my dad had said that you'll never be able to get a medical, because he was used to the military stuff. And even after the war, when my stepfather got into flying, he just went from basically the military to another government organization, the RCMP, and so he was not really familiar with civil aviation at all.
Well, was that a requirement in commercial or even in private flight?
No, long as you could read the eye chart with corrected vision, that there was no problem. That when I eventually found out about it, the person told me, "Why don't you go down to an aviation medical examiner and get a medical and start with that? See, make sure you can get a medical and then learn to fly."
Well, I guess in between that time of being able to get into actually getting your medical clearance, you obviously had a huge interest with aviation, and that's what kind of led you down in getting to your aircraft engineering degree.
Yeah, I thought at the time when I got out of high school, if I couldn't fly airplanes for a living, that working on them was certainly interesting. So that was the avenue I pursued when I got started in the business. Yeah.
Was there any other options? Like, do you remember any other possibility when you were young that, okay, there might be other options or interests you wanted to pursue? Or was this just something that you're like, no, you knew already from a young age, this was what you wanted to get into?
I knew right from a young age, that I'd wanted to get into that. Yeah. So
what about it?
That was the way I was looking, right from probably grade 10 on, when they start asking you in school what you think you'd like to do for the rest of your life working. So,
well, I'm get on you, because I wasn't that guy. I didn't have the foggiest idea of what I wanted to do. That's for sure. But what is, flying still, though, having said that, it does capture the imagination of just about everybody. I think it's one of those things that everybody dreams about. I mean, people even have dreams about flying. Maybe not a plane, but just the whole concept of flight. I mean, that's something that a lot of people get really fascinated with. Is that like, how did I know? Like, so what I'm trying to get at too is that you mentioned that you can't explain, what that is, but is there a way you can maybe somehow kind of give a bit of an idea of what was it that caught such a deep interest at a young age?
Some of my first rides in an airplane, I mean, you just get in it, the feeling of acceleration going down the runway, you leave the ground, it goes up, down, left, right, so maneuverable. You got all those dimensions that, it's just one of those things. Either you really like it. I'm sure there's a lot of people around that don't really like it, and some just tolerate it because it's a way to get from A to B. So
that's a good point. I never actually thought about that, as far as some people do have a bit of a fear or a phobia towards flying, don't they?
I've run into a few that do, that are plenty nervous. That they look at the statistics, which, I mean, it's a safe way to travel by and large, but it always makes big news stories when something happens. But, I would say by far one of the neatest experiences that anybody could experience is a ride in a helicopter. I mean, especially one of the old Bell 47s with the bubble on it, where you have such a good view. But as a machine to operate, that they are probably, in my estimation, one of the neatest machines in the world. That that it picks up into a hover. It can go straight up, straight down, left, right. Many of the people I've taken for rides in the Bell 47, that there's probably nothing more exhilarating in life than being on the top of a mountain and lifting up and going off of it.
I bet. Get the butterflies.
It's just something that your mind hasn't experienced any other way. So,
well, the Bell 47, is that what you see in MASH, like that TV show?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the military style kind of helicopter, small one.
That probably throughout the 50s and 60s, because that thing was designed in 1947. That was what most people thought a helicopter was, a Bell 47. But they're the light utility helicopter before the Bell Jet Ranger and the A-Star came along. So
World War II really defined, I think, a huge platform and leap in aviation, didn't it?
It did.
It seemed like, anyway.
Yeah, that it probably moved ahead way faster than it otherwise would have. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but a lot of the aircraft that even we have today, 60 something years, down the road, 70 years actually, still date back to that era. Like, especially when it comes to entry level into aviation on the private end of things, you're always getting into aircraft that, 1950s or 60s, more or less, as far as like your first aircraft.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons. I think to start out with, during the war, so much material was built, like the Pratt Whitney radial engine and stuff like that, that after the war, airplanes like the de Havilland Beaver, that they could use those leftover engines to power new airplanes.
Repurpose.
The engines were, but the airplane was new. And then by today's standards, it's too expensive to build anything that would do what a Beaver does today. So there's still enough of them operate that they'll keep going for a long time yet. So.
Yeah. Even though the so one of the things you mentioned in your book, and I think this is true for a lot of different things, are just cycle rates that you got to maintain over a period of time. But when you get to the actual frame, like the skeleton of an aircraft itself, how do you kind of keep that going for such a long period of time, when you're still kind of exerting these cycle rates,
Stuff like the de Havilland Beaver was so overbuilt that they didn't have the engineering that we do today with AutoCAD programs and stuff to make stuff lighter and lighter. And so it stood up really well. So that's why stuff like the de Havilland Beaver, the Otter, the Twin Otter, the DC-3 are still flying today.
Crazy. It's too bad they don't keep that same dynamic in mind when they manufacture newer vehicles. It's almost like they actually say, okay, well, we're going to get a nice 10-year lifespan out of this and then we're going to see this customer back.
Well, and they want to make everything lighter and lighter nowadays. So, if you
that's
built
true.
something and it stood up really well, how much lighter could, if we lighten it by 30%, make everything a little thinner, will it still do the job, and how long will it last? Like you say, it'll only last 10 years now. But
Yeah, pretty much. It seems like everything has a lifespan of about 10 years. They give you 5 years. They give you 5 years to be able to pay it. And that's your financing term. And then they give you a nice little 5 year, okay, we'll collect a little bit of the maintenance back end on this, and then time for a new one. Back in the system.
Yeah, and there's a joke around. I've seen it a few times when a crew takes the last Boeing 777 to park it in the desert at the end of its lifespan, that there'll be a DC-3 there to pick up the crew and fly them back home again. So.
That's kind of an odd truth, isn't it? Wow, if you think about it.
Yeah, well, again, the DC-3 was so overbuilt that it's still going on today, and it was a good design. Good design and overbuilt.
So back when you got interested in this and you got heavily involved into all these different varying aircrafts, you really had, I think, a inside perspective that not a lot of pilots really do when it came to the fact that you were an engineer. Like you had a pretty in-depth understanding and knowledge when it came to the mechanics and the repair and the maintenance, the value, and maybe some areas of weaknesses and strengths when it came to the whole array of different aircraft that were out there at that time.
You would. Most pilots, you go through a ground school course and you learn the systems of the airplane you're going to fly. You start with the simple ones first, the simple airplanes first. But yeah, you're right. Being an engineer, that you start by working under other maintenance guys and reading the book and repairing these things, so that when you go to learn to fly it, that now you know the systems and you know what makes it work. So it's a matter of learning how to fly it.
Do you think that played a bit of a role in your ability to be able to kind of navigate through the industry like you did, as far as bush, plane, Lear jet, and then even over into the helicopter, rotary aircraft?
Yeah, it did. Sometimes it's just the opportunities that come along that, through the span that I worked in the industry there, that jobs were a little harder to find. One of the things about the aviation business when I first started in it, that it's used in the north primarily for moving people from A to B, right? They're either, in those days, it was oil exploration work up in the Arctic, so there was moving workers in there, moving geologists in to look around for stuff. And the problem with a lot of that stuff is it's seasonal. So, you got a job in the spring, you work hard all spring, summer, and fall. Come winter, everything slows down or shuts down. And so you're either looking for work. So that's where the maintenance part of life came in, that I could work in the hangar and
supplement a little bit too.
So you could still do that, because as you know, living in the north is expensive.
I happen to do know that. Yeah.
Yeah, all year round. So especially in the winter when you got to start heating stuff and plugging vehicles in. So yeah.
Well, that it gives you a little bit of a different a set of skills also, I think, because I guess I use the term hardy. And I don't know how else to describe it, but it's an element that not a lot of other people experience. Just doing a simple task like maybe getting a plane ready or for flight, or whether you're at home trying to go to work, preheating a vehicle, or just being remote and having the skills to be able to deal with, I guess, unforeseens. Gives you a little bit of a different perspective that I don't think a lot of people really get in urban city centers, do they?
Now, one thing about flying any flight, doesn't matter whether it's in the north or down here, flying a jet around the world, it's all starts with the planning of it in the first thing, like planning it. And, planning includes just how to get from A to B, where you're going to get fuel, what kind of weather you're going to run into, all of those aspects of it. And every one of them, it doesn't matter whether you're flying a float plane, helicopter, a jet, all has a certain element to that. Then, like you say, you take the northern experience, in the north, you're either going to have it in a heated hangar, or you're going to have to heat it up before you go. So that adds another element.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's one element, I guess. So when you later on in your career, did you feel like as you started to really I guess develop your career and get into different areas of aviation, from the northern regions to a little bit more now crossing into international or overseas flight, did you go, oh my goodness, now there's a whole set of, I guess, elements that I wasn't really prepared or used to be able to draw from, like you did have, like the advantage you had maybe, in the northern regions when it came to communicating and planning and maybe even traveling at such an altitude?
Yeah, again, those flights brought on new challenges, and you can only study it so much. That we had manuals to study and whatnot, but in some instances, depending how far afield we were going, that we used a company that was more knowledgeable in getting our overflight clearances and filing flight plans, and being able to make fuel arrangements and stuff like that. Like with a corporate jet, when you land in Moscow, they don't take credit cards. So unless you've arranged fuel and flight planning and handling and everything, that you're not going to be going anywhere. And
no, it's not like you throw your credit card in a pump and fuel it up, eh?
No.
Pre-approve $100 and away you go.
Yeah. And then there's the business of learning how to get the airplane there, because again, I'll pick Russia because that was a place we were going through fairly regularly, that instead of feet above the ground, they fly in meters. They speak English to you if you speak English, but it's very hard to understand English because they only know the English words for the phrases that they want to use for aviation. And so it can be really difficult trying to figure out what they just said or where they cleared you to, stuff like that. So.
Yeah. Well, you'd almost need a translator on a trip like that if you're going from, especially one country to the other. I mean, Russia or China or other countries.
No, like I say, they all speak English. English is the international language. But
is it? So aren't we lucky?
If you call them up in English, they answer you in English. But
that's a huge advantage. What about the other pilots that don't know English? I guess if you're an aviator in other countries, that's almost a whole nother, that's a prerequisite for getting into.
You got to learn it. Like if you go over to Boundary Bay Airport and look at all the foreign people that are here learning to fly, one of the first things you have to pass is an exam that you understand English well enough, because air traffic control in Western Canada here is only in English. If you go to Quebec, it's French and English, but
still English.
But if you call up in English, they'll answer you in English, and and because those are clearances that are clearing you to be on a specific route and stuff like that, that it's important that you understand what they're saying, or even if they got to repeat it several times. So but you're right. It put lots of stress in the flights, all right, that dealing with that was just one of the problems.
Yeah. Well, especially, like I said, you're lucky that I guess English is a little bit of a universal language. I had no idea that it was such a prominent requirement, like on a global scale.
Yeah, like if you're going into China or any of the other countries, they'll speak to you. They speak to you in English.
That's cool.
And some of them are very good at it. Some of them not so good at it. But
no, I'm sure. Yeah, you definitely get an array of different people that have different levels of understanding.
And the stress for us kind of came like operating around the main airport at Moscow, going out of there. That if you heard them speaking English, we knew they were speaking to us because they're speaking Russian to everybody else.
Yeah.
So you don't know what's going on around you, which can be a little bit alarming at times too. And we were going from Moscow to Dubai on those flights, so you're going between two war zones, so we were advised always to stay on the flight plans that they'd filed us, to not accept any shortcuts or anything.
Oh, yeah. Accept a shortcut. What do you mean? Like,
Well,
would that be an option?
well, the routing isn't always a straight line, like say from Moscow to Dubai, that it'll be via a routing. And sometimes, depending on the time of day or night that you do it, that they can change that routing and straighten the lines out a bit. It'll save you 10 minutes or 20 minutes in the whole length of the flight or something. And but in doing so, they might take you over a war zone. So we didn't want to be doing it.
They don't stay mindful of stuff like that, eh? Like they're not really quite as concerned about.
Well, they tell you that war isn't being held there right now, that the airspace isn't restricted, but we still didn't want to be there.
Yeah. No. Why risk it?
Yeah.
For 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Risk versus reward, I suppose.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt that. I'd be in the same position. Jeez. Yeah. You don't know what other countries are in the middle of doing and the level of tension that might be going on at that time, right? You're not always, real time aware of.
Well, there's a lot of it going on
intentions.
right now because nobody's rooting over Russia.
Yeah.
That start out with they wouldn't let you. So even flights like Air Canada and stuff are having to route all of their flights around Russian airspace. So that stuff like that in the world that exists. Chinese airspace is always interesting to go through too, because it's all controlled by the military, and they wouldn't let us stay at high altitudes we like to be at. They would invite us down to a lower altitude. And I found out that it wasn't just an invite, that they're telling you got to be down there and that's it.
They're asking you politely, but they don't want to take no for an answer.
Yeah, no is not the answer.
So the whole, I guess, advantage of a high altitude is less friction, and you're able to travel at a higher speed with lower fuel consumption.
Yeah, lower fuel consumption is the big higher speed and lower fuel consumption and generally way above the weather.
Oh, so what height is the weather typically? Like, is there a bit of a standard right across the globe where weather patterns typically hang out?
No, you'll find. I mean, we've seen clouds all the way up at 51,000 feet still, but
Oh, wow.
Typically, a lot of these smaller weather systems, I would say you're probably on top of them by 20,000 feet normally. And in smoother air and stuff, like nobody likes going through those puffy white clouds that are going to jolt the airplane all over the place, and they like it even less when they see lightning bolts come out of them and stuff like that.
Have you seen weather though that high that you normally wouldn't see on the ground? Like, is there different layers where you typically would see weather that we're used to, as far as what we're impacted by ground, and then like a whole nother world that's a little higher that typically you never see unless you're a pilot?
Yeah, like probably the highest weather that I've seen is on the flights when we were going from Hawaii down to Australia across the equator through the intertropical convergence zone there, that we've seen weather that looked like it was topping out well above 60,000 feet. So,
60,000 feet.
Yeah. So
That's up there.
all we can do is set our radar up and kind of start working your way through. It's kind of like working your way through a minefield of weather and thunderstorms.
Are they more severe when they're at that altitude?
Yeah, they can be really severe. That the hail that falls out of them is the big thing that could destroy anything, right? So,
Yeah. Well, how did they get so high? Because I thought temperature up that high was really cold.
yeah, it starts really cold, and once you start the vertical development happening, that's one of the few places I've ever seen them that high. And down around Thunder Bay, Ontario, quite often in the late afternoon, evenings, you see them building up there 50,000 feet as well.
That's just warm air that gets pushed and it goes straight up because it has nowhere else to go. And
And you got the right amount of moisture and the right amount of heat and everything that it needs to keep building up there, yeah.
wow. So what would be an average, like if in terms of, I guess, international travel, what is like the the sweet spot when it comes to, cruising altitude? Right around 50,000
With
feet?
the Citation 10, no, we normally flight planned around 45 to 47,000 feet was comfortable for that airplane.
Oh, okay.
But some of the smaller airplanes, 41,000 feet. Most of the airlines are around 35,000 feet. So,
What is it about that area? Like, is there a bit of a balancing act between having enough oxygen and air to be able to use as fuel, but then also thin enough to be able to, maintain a certain speed? And it's like a cross between one and the other.
yeah, that most airplanes, it is a balancing act, all right. Yeah, that you got to have enough air there to support, to make lift to support the airplane. The engine's got to be able to make enough power to get it there and keep it at the speed that it needs to be at to stay there. And so that's why, all of them will be slightly different as to, and the other thing with a lot of airplanes that you're taking off, depending on how far you're going with at maximum takeoff weight, and then as you burn fuel off and the airplane lightens up, then you can climb to the higher altitudes. And you burn less fuel up there. That's always the reason typically for going there and or a smoother ride. But yeah.
With the cycle recordings, something that I became a little more aware of, not only with your book, but then previous conversations with other aviators or aviation in general, was the unbelievable amount of forces that are on a plane through just one flight when you're getting up to those heights, because you're dealing with pressures, not only going through an air, fast enough to peel flesh off the bone, but then also the temperature differential, like how cold it is, and then differential in atmospheric pressure. So you've got like wild forces on a plane, especially the hull. Like how thick is, or fuselage, I should say. How thick is that? Like that's having to deal with a tremendous amount of different pressures.
Probably talking about aluminum skins that are slightly less than a quarter of an inch thick. I would think most of them are that. But the Citation 10, for instance, because of the altitude that it could get to, 51,000 feet, the pressurization inside the airplane is 10.5 psi. So that is a lot of pounds of pressure per square inch on the inside of that thing every time you pressurize it, right?
Well, so what is the negative atmosphere pressure on the outside? Like we have normal atmospheric pressures. How much at sea level? What is that? Like absolute, what is the?
Well, 29 inches of mercury. But it wouldn't be that you've lessened it so much on the outside as the amount that you've raised it on the inside. It'd be, just like taking a basketball here and blowing it up to 10 psi. Like, how much pressure that is if you just poked a little hole in it, how it's going to come ripping out of there till it evacuates all that pressure out of it, right?
And then the temperature on it, so everything gets so much more brittle.
Yeah, the temperature typically up there is minus 50 to minus 70 centigrade.
Wow.
Which is good for the engines for making power, but...
Why? Just because the density of
the density, yeah.
Oh. But then you're going from, let's say, plus 4, let's say plus 30 C to minus 50. That's a big difference in temperature, like thermal cycling.
It is, yeah. And that caused us some headache one night coming back from Aberdeen, Scotland, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that the regulator that keeps the windshield, they keep them heated all the time. And it makes them stronger. So it's partially for bird resistance, but partially that it's got to be strong enough to withstand all that pressure. So the regulator failed and it went into an overheat mode, and then it shut itself off. So it went from overheat to minus 70 on the outside pane instantly, and it shattered the windshield into quarter-inch pieces. I remember actually reading that, and that's like, when you're in a position, I'm thinking, if I was in that position, and you're dealing with, how fast do you travel at that altitude? What's your speed? Well, our ground speed's 530 knots. That but again, you got the thinner air, so I'm not really sure what the pressure on the outside of that window would be. That windshield is 1 3/8 inch thick triplex glass, so
That's super thick, eh?
could probably withstand a 50 caliber bullet head on, and it won't break it. But thermal shock will definitely shatter it instantaneously. So it shattered the outside pane in that case. It's definitely alarming, all right. And
Oh yeah, minus 50 degree, well, 500 kilometer wind in your face.
yeah, well, no,
And then the shrapnel.
the rest of the windshield held together. The biggest problem would be if that thing had failed to the point that we couldn't pressurize the airplane. Even with an oxygen mask, I'm not sure that you'd survive that. The removing that much pressure from the outside of your body instantaneously is going to cause you all kinds of problems.
Yeah, it'd be similar to, what do they call that with the divers when they come from depths?
Like the bends, yeah.
Yeah, the
decompression,
bends.
Yeah.
So it'd be, I guess, a similar effect, wouldn't it?
It would be, yes. Yeah.
Wow. Unreal. That's not something I'd want to go through.
No.
Wasn't there a story? I remember a story where the windshield did actually break and the pilot got sucked out, but then he got hung up on his legs.
Yeah.
And he was wrapped around the back or the top side of the fuselage.
And he actually did survive it.
Yeah.
That's one of the few airplanes, it was a British-built jet, that particular one, and they put the windshield in from the outside with screws that hold it in, where most of the airplanes I flew, the windshield's put in from the inside.
Yeah.
So the fasteners aren't what are holding it
Exactly.
in there. The pressure is actually pushing it tighter into the frame, and where in their case, the pressure was pushing it out of the frame, and they had the wrong screws in it, is what had happened, and let go.
And it sucked him right out of the
And
aircraft.
Typically, because they're restrictive, that once you're up in cruise and stuff, everybody undoes their shoulder harness, and you keep your lap belt on, just keep you in the seat if you get into turbulence. But yeah, so it just about got him out of the airplane. But yeah,
Man, that's not something I'd want to go through, that's for sure. Actually, there was I don't want to talk about too much of the book because I want to leave the listener with something, but there was one story you talked about where there was a guy that was really apprehensive about flying, and I think it was right around the same time as the windshield, and he was sitting beside the door. You had him sitting right behind your seat because it was in a smaller plane, and the door seal had failed and caused decompression, and you went to go looking for him, and his seat was gone because he's right beside the door. Or not the seat, sorry, he was missing out of his seat, and you looked around and he was stuffed in the very back, pretty much trying to share seats with someone else because he wanted to get the hell out of there.
yeah. Well, probably coming from the north, you've probably ridden, if not seen, the Beech 1900 airliner. That it's a fairly long, skinny airplane. It's basically a King Air that's been lengthened out to have 19 passenger seats in it. And some people didn't like sitting way back in it because, you're sitting way back looking down this narrow tube. And, before the flight, the guy told me that he was claustrophobic. He didn't like that. And I said, we'll put you in last, sit right at the front here, the seat right beside the door. That's as far as you can get ahead. And like you say, that we're at 25,000 feet, I think, and the door seal blew out of that thing. And that's an airplane that's only pressurized about 3.5 psi. And
oh, wow.
The effect of that was just about enough to cause your head to come apart. And yeah, I could see that. I'm sure that that would scare anybody. That
well, the image you in the book, the way you described it, man, I was actually on the ferry. Because it's near the end of the book, and I was reading it and caught myself laughing out loud. And there were I'm reading a book, and everybody was kind of looking around at me and seeing, oh, what's this guy? What's he giggling about? But the way you described it, because you said when you turned around, it was just everybody in that plane just kind of all calm, staring at just you, right? Just blinking eyes with concerned looks on their face.
Yeah, well, everybody, including me, is wondering what just happened. Of course, I'm ahead of the door, so I can't see what, I thought like a window's broken or something has happened. And, the door seal turned out to be probably as minor of a problem as you could have, if you want to call a depressurization at 25,000 feet a minor problem. But, and again, a lot of the people you get, that particular flight we were coming out of Mass at BC on the Queen Charlotte Islands. And so there are people that work on fishing lodges and they travel up and down there a lot. Some of them are the people going to fishing lodges too. So, you get all different levels of people with how much experience they got riding around in airplanes.
Yeah. Well, with a seal that has to deal with, the same variations on pressures and temperature and stuff. What makes a seal? Is it just a big tube that allows a little bit of
it's generally like a rubber tube. In a lot of cases, it inflates with bleed air, so it just makes the door seal tightly to the frame because you're raising the air pressure inside the airplane and you need to keep it raised. So you need to keep it from escaping out various places.
So it's not like an O-ring or something where it allows for a little bit of flex and movement within the door.
The
jam, I guess.
It pretty much has to, yeah.
Oh. And so that there was a pinhole. It just ruptured. Like a bicycle
and
tube.
it was actually a problem with the door frame more than the seal. It turned out that particular airplane had trouble with that thing before, and again, those airplanes get so many cycles in any given day, like takeoffs, landings, taking off, climbing to altitude, landing. That I think that airplane had 35,000 hours on it then, which is, for that type airplane, it's getting up there.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about that, but you mind if we kind of go back a little bit more back into, I'm curious about the beginning, earlier days of aviation and what the transition was like. What was that opportunity, or what steps did you have to take from going from, being a mechanic or an engineer into actually obtaining your pilot's license and
I started out learning to fly basically as a hobby when I found out that I could get a medical, and I thought that if I could get my private license, you'd know a lot more about working on airplanes if you knew how they operated. So living in Whitehorse at the time, took the ground school course throughout the winter that gives you something to do in the winter. Took a couple of what they called the introductory flights back in the day. For $5 you could go and get a half-hour lesson. They were trying to entice people into
$5.
Yeah, I think that's what it was in 1971. Yeah.
Wow. So what would that sounds cheap, but we'll put that into perspective in today's, I guess, value.
Well, back in those days, I think I was making $350 a month as a aircraft maintenance guy. So, like $5 still meant quite a bit to you. But
so you're looking at closer to what, $20 today nowadays.
Yeah, I want to be closer to $100.
$100 today.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the cost of all that's gotten so high, but like anything else, you look at it, and I thought that to make the transition into going flying, that you needed to get a commercial license. So to get that commercial license, you needed at least 150 hours, and I can't remember what the rates were in those days, but it was probably $15 or $20 an hour to rent the airplane. And again, at $350 a month, and you're paying rent in Whitehorse. I remember when gas got to be worth $1 a gallon up there. We thought, how long is this ever going to last? And so it seemed like a mountain you were never going to be able to climb. But just kept working away at it. It took a few years, but to get the hours in, get the commercial license, and then you don't have enough experience that anybody wants to hire you, so you still got to keep working away.
Yeah. Man, on I guess a pay structure, an investment on time, money, and then as far as career income, you really got to have, I think, the love for aviation, don't you, to get into it?
Yeah, you definitely did. Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a lot of effort to get into it. And, like I say, even once you get the license and you get that first job, so there's work in the summer, but not in the winter. And then there's always all the different aspects of that as well, that if you're going to the north, people want you to have experience with float planes. So now you need a float rating. That was another 5 hours of training just on floats. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to hire you with just 5 hours of float plane and experience to send you out in their float plane. And, then there's the twin engine airplane. So that was more training to be able to fly an airplane with more than one engine on it. And typically, once you got into that, the next thing that came along with it, you had to be able to fly it on instruments in cloud. So that was an instrument rating, and that was a big thing. So yeah.
Did that allow you to fly at night?
Yeah.
Or is that like a whole nother separate deal?
No, night's another whole separate
is that a
deal
whole,
too. Yeah.
Man.
So yeah.
And then you have to kind of be a little bit more familiar with each individual style of plane, don't you? Like there's, I guess, the rating of a certain plane, but then it's like a truck. There's a 1-ton pickup, but then you have different versions of those. You have the Ford, the Chevy, you have like different, I guess, models.
Yeah, they're all a little different. What Transport Canada does, they group all of the smaller single-engine airplanes together. So once you got a commercial license, you can fly anything up to 12,500 pounds gross takeoff weight with a single engine on it. And then you get into the multi-engine airplanes, so you got to have the special endorsement for that. When you get into the jets, you got to have a type endorsement for every one of them and have had specific training for that airplane. And as much it's to manage all the systems and everything that are on it.
So that's how they control competency and quality control when it comes to the pilot's abilities to be able to get into a certain class, and then specific on each different plane. It's just, I guess, an endorsement or a orientation, so to speak, I guess, more or less for that specific plane.
Yeah. In the early years up in Yellowknife, the chief pilot of a company would be the person that did a check ride with you, and he might get one of the other pilots who's already flying that type to go through ground school stuff with you on the airplane. And then you do a pilot proficiency check ride with him, and they determine if they were going to let you fly it or not. And where the corporate jets, we typically went to flight safety down in the States into Texas. So there's quite a few facilities that they have facilities at every 6 months. And typically most of my career on that, I was flying a couple of different airplanes all the time. So it worked out that every 6 months you'd end up down there on a recurrent training course.
In Texas?
Yeah.
Isn't that weird that they don't have facilities like that here, like in Canada, maybe somewhere?
No.
Edmonton or even Ontario?
Some of the big airlines do have their own simulators up here, but most of the simulators for the smaller airplanes are at major centers in the States, because there's way more airplanes down there than there are in Canada. So,
that's surprising though. That I guess is aviation not much of a specific, I guess, not an industry, but like career move that it's kind of so small that's the only place to go to for something like that. The demand isn't high enough.
It is, yeah.
Wow.
That Flight Safety International, like they've made that a huge business. That the building of those full motion day and night simulators is very expensive, and they try to keep them booked 24 hours a day. That's another thing with that type of training. When you book it, you might be flying the simulator from 3 a.m. until 7 o'clock or something like that. That they run 24 hours a day. So
jet lag.
Yeah. Well, that's jet lag just going for simulator training. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, so what is like going back to, I guess, the whole flight in the northern part and getting into it. What was that like? I mean, is there any kind of real experiences or stories that like pop out having to fly?
The main
up
thing
north?
was just convincing somebody to give you a chance, and that typically the further you get from any kind of a town, the more likely you are, because nobody wants to be there. So, I mean, in my case, when I went up to the Northwest Territories, I found a guy in Fort Ray, north of Yellowknife, that was looking for somebody that could fly a 185, and Cessna 185, and he particularly liked the idea that you could fix it too. So that that got me a start there. And once you got up to the north, and people got to know you because you're meeting other people and flying into Yellowknife and stuff like that, that you could find the next place to go to. So
when living up north, one of the interests that we have, and I think most people, their interest spark is when you mention bush pilot, or just we're flying up north in general because of the remoteness. You've got tundra tires, or you've got maybe floats like you had mentioned, and you don't really have the infrastructure, really kind of any airport or ability to just kind of go down and land. So that's a bit of a drawback when it comes to being able to fly, but that's also the attraction too for a lot of pilots or people that get into aviation up there, because not only is it the freedom to be able to kind of go out and explore, but it's got the challenges that go with it. You hear stories of people landing on highways or roads, or if you got a float, you go camping and fishing, exploring maybe into remote areas in the wilderness. And were you able to, enjoy, that aspect, or have any kind of wild experiences?
All
with
the
it?
years that we're in the north that we did that several of the companies I worked for that, within a 25 or 30 mile, 50 mile an hour radius, that we could take an airplane out for an overnight or a day. And out of Yellowknife, we had a couple of lakes that we went out camping on there, and we'd get a group of people together.
Oh,
and
man.
yeah,
I would love to get a plane just for that reason. So I live up north on a quarter that has a pipeline right away through it. And we kind of spoke on that earlier. And I was telling a buddy of mine that lives down here about it. And they're going to hopefully get their pilot's license. And it's something I want to get because I want to use it as a runway. And I don't know whether or not, maybe this is something you can help me with, but I don't know if I ever got into it, what I would want to gravitate to. What's the advantage as far as putting tundra tires on a plane and then you can take off and land on gravel bars and, short little runways? Or is there an advantage with putting floats on a plane and now you're able to kind of hit, smaller lakes and streams? Or what would your preference be?
Again, they all have their best points that they do well. That float planes, for going to lakes, typically most people don't like going into rivers and streams with them too much. That there's stuff under the water that you can hit. The tundra tires, again, they use them where there isn't really any other good place to land. They can take a lot rougher ground than just regular wheels could. That throughout the north, we mostly either used in the wintertime skis or wheel skis and floats in the summertime. Like when I started work,
floats in the summer, that's the most versatile application, is to throw floats on.
Yeah. When I started working in Fort Ray, there is no airport in Fort Ray. So they laid out a strip on the ice once the ice got thick enough in the fall that generally more than 6 inches. So they looked for 6 inches to start with that would hold a 185 up. And we had wheel skis on our airplanes. So those are skis where you've got the wheels there still. You can pump the skis up and land on a paved runway with the skis up, land on snow with the skis down. And most of the settlements we were going to in those days, they've all been renamed, but Lac La Marche, Ray Lake, Snare Lake Village, those places, none of them had airports either. So we landed on the lake that was adjacent to them. And in the summertime, you did it on floats. So it was either floats or skis, basically.
Oh,
And,
yeah. So the skis, when you're landing on pavement, you're able to pull those up enough to where they're not actually coming into contact and wearing the hell out of them? Oh.
Yeah, the typically the heels of them got rub blocks on them where they well rub on the pavement, but that's the idea behind it, that you can operate off a paved runway and still have skis.
With floats, would you be able to, and this is a bit of an outlandish question, I've never seen it, but I'll ask it anyways, and maybe an application of a field where there's a lot of grass, maybe it's a known field when it comes to rocks, would you be able to land or even take off with floats, with wheels on floats in a field application, and then water if you were to go somewhere?
Well, the Amphib
remotely?
floats, I mean, they were built to operate off paved runways into the water.
Oh.
You don't see them commercially used that much because the weight of them cuts down the load carrying ability of the airplane too much for commercial operation. But and floats, straight floats, that typically the only time you see them land on anything but water is in the fall, like in places like Fort Nelson. There's no convenient lake around that place, so they'll bring all of the float planes in and land them on the grass adjacent to the runway there.
Oh, you can land them on grass?
Yeah, and then in the spring when they put them back on floats, they put them on a dolly and take off the runway on a dolly.
So what do you, oh, I see. Oh, that's a good idea, isn't it? Oh, geez, I didn't even actually think about that. I've never seen it. What are they made out of that can withstand that kind of impact? Like
They're just aluminum, the floats, and
they're aluminum.
they can't withstand a lot of impact. That it's got to be smooth grass, no rocks on it. It's even best if it has snow on it still, or by then. Quite often the transition at the end of the season, come September there, that you might already have a dusting snow on the ground before you get them out of the water. So.
Is it hard to change a plane like that, the configuration from, let's say, a float, ski, thunder tire?
No, they generally do it in a day so they can take it off floats, put the wheels back on it, or the other way around come spring.
So if a guy like myself that got all eager, wanted to do something like that and invest, it'd be something that would be a nice option to have?
Yeah, it is. I mean, in your part of the country, that an airplane on floats throughout the whole winter, you're not even going to be able to use it. So unless you put it on wheels, that there it sits. And you see them where they do that, where an operator doesn't need the airplane for the winter, so they just put it on dry land and tie it down for the winter.
Price of vehicles right now, it almost seems like I could probably get myself into a decent plane for the same price as a pickup.
Yeah. That there's no doubt about it, that although they've been steadily going up in price too. And the thing with any airplanes in Canada, that if they become too cheap here, the Americans come up and buy them because of the better U.S. dollar, right? So every time this happens, that their dollar gets quite a bit above ours, you see a lot of airplanes migrating out of Canada back down there again. So,
What about I guess experiences up there? Is anything kind of crazy? Like, I know it seems like up there the hours of service compared to a crazy story of an experience someone had. Anything that you've encountered up there that has been kind of a little bit more memorable?
Well, again, the north, the summertime's the busy time. You get 24-hour daylight there. That so everything's go there. And in my early years up there, that there's still plenty to learn. You think you know how to fly an airplane, but now you start operating on skis onto ice, and ice looks the same from above. You can't tell whether
How thick
it's
it
an
is.
inch thick or 5 feet thick. And early in the season, we'd ask people to auger holes in the ice because, like I say, we were looking for 6 inches of it. But in reality, about 3 inches will hold a 185 up on the skis itself, but it won't hold you up walking on the ice.
Wow.
Just because of the pressure that when you look at the pounds per square foot, that a 220-pound person stepping onto the ice, you're not even got 1 square foot holding you up there. Eh? So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how do you test that with a plane? If you're unsure, you want to go down, you just kind of do a soft landing and see if.
Well, what you can do is, you can go down and run the skis along the ice and then come back around and look in the tracks of the snow, see if there's water filling into them or not. And again, with ice, there's quite a few different. One, the ice can be thin early in the year, or you can have current under the ice, so it can be really cold. You'd expect it to be thick, but the current is eroding it from underneath. Or you get enough snow sitting on it that it pushes the ice down and the water flows up above it, freezes it again. And so it became one of those things, if you saw ice that looked way too smooth, you're leery about it right off the bat because it was probably new
probably
ice.
Water.
Yeah.
Water sitting on top of the ice.
Yeah. And as much as you're always looking for smooth ice to land on, that if it was too smooth, that was one of the first things you're looking at. So you would definitely go and put a set of tracks across that and see if it's breaking up or what it's doing. So,
in your book, you had discussed various rescue operations that you've been involved in. Any one of them kind of stick out in your memory?
Probably the one that was the most traumatic, or whatever you would say, were the kids and the Boy Scout leaders that drowned in Kimbasket Lake there when I was flying a helicopter up there. But in that they came and asked if I could fly and have a look, because we were looking for people in a canoe, not in the water. So
that one stuck a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's not very often. You go out looking for a couple of Grumman canoes with should have an adult and 2 kids in them, and not only could we not find the canoes, couldn't find anything until we made the second pass over. Once you got your eye tuned that you're not looking for a canoe anymore, you're just looking for anything that is unusual. And turns out that bodies floating in the water and life jackets don't show up very well. It was a bit of an unfortunate thing. So,
how did that come across? It was just a rescue mission, and someone called and asked if you could be a part of it for.
Yeah, I was
piloting.
Flying out of Mica Creek, flying geodetic surveyors around to the mountain area around there. That they were doing a survey because of the Mica Dam there, and Kimbasket Lake is a huge lake behind it, and that Boy Scout troop, I don't know how many of them there were, but there had to have been 10 or 15 canoes of them that had left from Golden, and they were coming to Mica. And I'd seen them come in earlier in the day, most of them, and you don't know what's going on or what they're doing, but eventually somebody came over to the helipad that I was working off of and asked if I'd seen 2 more canoes up the arm that way. And I told them I hadn't really been paying attention. I saw them come in, but on my afternoon flights when I was going back out there to pick people up, I'd have a look, and never didn't see anything. They came back and asked, and then it became more concerning because now they were really getting worried that that these people shouldn't be that far apart. And as it turns out, I don't know that they were totally aware of. Kimbasket Lake is a glacier-fed lake, and the water is so cold in it that you won't last long in the water. So,
wow,
you'd think in the heat of summertime when it's 30 degrees outside that you should be all right floating around in the water there, but
not glacier-fed.
They'd all died from hypothermia, so they hadn't been in the water that long, but.
How often have you underestimated the seriousness of like your adventures? Can you share an incident that you had a narrow escape and how you managed to kind of get out of it?
Well, again, like there's lots of the things that you do with any one of these flights that, fuel range of the airplane, the weather, how badly the people want to get to where they're going and stuff like that, you got to weigh the odds on every one of them. So, some of them are more serious than others, problems with the airplane. Sometimes you look at it and think that you can deal with it. And under some circumstances you could deal with it, but, you start getting more things going wrong. And
well, you know how they say that sometimes complacency is their worst enemy? And I've always hated that term a little bit, but I guess I've come to realize that even with myself, there's been a few times where you do something. It could be as simple as driving, right? People drive and they feel comfortable enough just driving from point A to point B, and you get on your phone, or maybe it's not even something about a distraction. You're just driving along and then all of a sudden something happens and you're like, man, that actually had a little bit of something to do with the fact that I could have prevented it, right? I mean, it's hard to try and stay focused on something that you do so many times over such a long period of time.
Yeah, complacency, I would have to say, is definitely something that anybody involved in it should watch out for. That if you become too comfortable at something, that you figure you can just do it, like you say, without putting all that thought around it, because all you need to do is have a whole bunch of more little distractions going on around you, and it can turn into a catastrophe.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Did you manage to try and avoid some of that with the fact that you're always kind of pushing not the boundaries, but your abilities? You're getting in from float planes, and then you jump over into rotary, like helicopters. And
Yeah, well, I found that typically did keep your focus a lot more focused, because you're just changed from one thing to the next. It's not that comfortable. You're comfortable enough doing it, but enough that you got your mind analyzing all these different things all the time, right? So
yeah, it's something that I think is, like Kevin had pointed out, a very unique, I think, aspect that you have. Like, do you know many other people that have such a huge array of different skills? Mechanics, and then bush plane and helicopter and Lear jets.
There's a few of us around. We typically all know each other because we have kind of migrated that way. I met Kevin himself there when he was just a young fella getting into the industry, and all he wanted to fly at the time was ag planes. And but like he said, his path eventually took him to the airlines, and he flies a Boeing 777 for Air Canada. He's a captain there now, and but he still loves aviation. That I've been helping him over the last 12 years, more even than that, rebuilding a vintage Stearman biplane, and so he's a guy that he loves aviation, but the airlines is his career, and his hobbies his hobby, so he's managed to keep the two of them that apart.
That's interesting. Most people that get into a career or something want nothing to do with it on their off time.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, that is the case, but throughout mine, I still always enjoyed flying for hobby. I bought airplanes, built airplanes, fixed them up. My son was interested in it, so he learned to fly, went through air cadets and all the rest of that stuff, and he's a commercial pilot today. So
why write a book? Where'd that idea come from?
I don't know. It was always in the back of my head that I thought I might write a book, but you never think you're probably going to ever get around to doing it. But over the years, talking to people said, gee, a lot of the stuff you've done is interesting. Why don't you write a book?
Yeah.
Everybody says that. Well, sitting down and writing a book takes quite a lot of work.
Yeah. How did you even do that? You went from, You just write down certain notes, or did you have someone help you?
I started writing down notes, but no, eventually I just decided to sit down at the computer and start at square one and work my way through it. So the notes became the chapters. I talked to a couple of other friends of mine that have written books, and they said the most important thing about writing a book is to sit down, write something down, like get it down. Don't worry about punctuation, editing, or anything. Just get it down and keep going, and then go back and do all of that, because you'll be adding and subtracting.
Yeah. Throw it all in there and then try and get the whole coherency of it all kind of finalized, and you can fill in the details and the blanks and try
I was
bring it
lucky
together.
that I had my logbooks. I've always kept a paper logbook. So every flight that I've ever done has got a line in that logbook, and that I got 7 of them, I think, now. They're all on that shelf behind you, those blue books there.
Oh, yeah. You mind if I pull one of them out?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to, this one right here. Oh, I don't know which one this is. I'm going to just take a peekaboo.
Which one it is here, just so I look at it. And it's book number 4.
Book number 4. I have something very similar. Not quite like this, though. It's kind of neat. So it looks like you've got the month, the date. Oh, the type of the plane. Registration. Is that what the REG is?
Yeah.
Pilot. Self. Second pilot. And then remarks. And then it goes over into single engine aircraft. So what does this all kind of look like here? You've got, what are these meanings? I don't know what this is about.
So the differences on that page are the types that were being flown. So at the top of the page, I flew a Bell 222. The next day, it was a de Havilland Beaver on floats. Then the Bell Jet Ranger, the Bell 222, then the Falcon 20 fan jet. And the numbers over in the columns here are the hours that you flew that airplane.
Oh, okay.
So these are all the times over here. And you add them all up at the bottom, and here's your total time there. So.
Oh. It must have taken you a ton of time to go through all of this stuff, eh? For the book?
Oh, during the pandemic, I had plenty of time to do it, right? So,
is that when you wrote the book?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll put that back. That's kind of interesting. One of the things that you captured that I don't think many people touch on when it comes to aviation is the amount of times that you ended up actually having to move or wanting to move for a job. I'll just place this
that's
here
good, yeah.
And the pressures that it put not only on your ability to stay, employed, of course, because like you said, it's very seasonal in different areas, but then the pressures, I had on the family, with your wife and the kids and moving from one area to another. I mean, that isn't something a lot of people touch on. And you seem to you pulled it into your book a little bit, and you made sure people were aware of that.
Yeah, it's a hard thing on the family, because you're uprooting the family and moving them to a different town, different friends, different schools.
Yeah.
My wife took different jobs in different places that we lived, and you typically had to sell the place you were living in, find another one, rent it, and most of those early moves, we had to pay for them all ourselves. That nobody was moving you. That if you wanted a job, here it is, come
expense.
there. Yeah. So
wow.
It did get to be huge expense, and it wasn't until the later years, the last couple of moves that I ever did, that the companies you're working for paid to move you and paid all the expenses and everything else.
Yeah. Well, you had to have something, the experience and track record to make it attractive enough to where now it's not as easy to try and get that pool of talent, right? Like you said earlier, the workforce was deep, but now it's not so much, right? I mean, especially with the experience.
Well, that's the thing now, that there's they told me all through my career that eventually there's going to be a pilot shortage. You know, they're going to be looking for people. Well, I spent 55 years in the business, and only after I got to retirement has that come to be now.
Yeah, it was right across
there's
the
a shortage
board.
of people in the industry, yeah.
Actually, I forgot to mention or show this. I think the viewer might like to see this. Those who are listening right now, on audio only, they're gonna have to, well, go to YouTube and look at this. But you mind if I show this to the camera?
No?
Just yeah, it's kind of neat. The
I referred to that in my book there too, the book of numbers there, that there was a picture of it on one of the pages there. That
was there? Because I didn't even see that.
Because that's what leads to the next job, where you had the experience and stuff. And again, back when I was trying to do this, you had to have a lot more experience. Like nobody wanted, you had to have 5,000 hours in your logbook or nobody'd even talk to you. And now I see airlines in the States that if you got 1,000 hours, that they'd be glad to have you.
Wow. Wow, the supply and demand has shifted wildly. Eh?
Yeah.
Man. So 10,000 hours. Is that a transition where you need to document that, and then after that you don't really need to keep that logbook like what you have? Or
no, really the only reason you need to keep that logbook is to prove that you got the time and the right type of experience for your commercial license, your night rating, your instrument rating, multi-engine rating. And a lot of people after that don't bother keeping it at all. That they just guesstimate that they fly 800 hours a year and that's it. But
you kept it going though, right from...
Still do to this day.
Wow.
Yeah.
You captured the whole career. Your whole career is that's unreal.
Well, it's interesting because on Thursday that I flew a twin engine Beechcraft down to Victoria to work on a helicopter, and it took us all day to get the helicopter running right, but at the end of the day got to fly it back. So it's interesting. I like to just keep track of it still. That's the first time I've flown a helicopter in 15 years that it's not exactly like riding a bike, but you don't really totally forget. So
yeah. Well, what were, I guess, the intentions with the book? Like, did you want to capture some of the stories and experiences, or what was, when you wrote it, what was, I guess, your approach on it? What did you want to try and capture?
I would say when I first started writing it, that the people that were most interested in it were my two kids, my daughter and my son. And my one sister kept bugging me about it. And then people that I know around the area here, one lady's a retired school teacher, said that you just got to get with the program and get this done.
Everyone's doing it, don't you know?
So, when you're sitting here writing, you got to kind of imagine the audience that you're writing for, right? That, like, who's going to read this, and are they going to understand what we're talking about? And so the first manuscript, I gave it to Marilyn. She's a retired school principal, English teacher. She's also a private pilot. And so she read through it to put some notes to see, I said, does it sound understandable to you? And, what do you think? So, that's how we went from there, kind of.
The whole point of what you tried to, there were moments that you shared in the book, and I think it was probably areas somewhat vulnerability there. I mean, with your brother, there was an experience where for a lot of people that would have been a very difficult thing to not only document, but then even having experienced it, continuing on with aviation in general. Did you struggle with trying to have, something like that included in a book?
Yeah, it was, where to put that in the book was also a problem that I tried to keep the book in the right order as I went through it. I personally myself hate books when you're reading through them. They jump back and forth all the time. You don't know where it is and or what time it. I can see it all in my mind, but you reading it wouldn't know if it was the beginning or the end, right? So, and again, so I took some advice on that from when it eventually became to the point that it looked like it was really actually going to become a book. That Jack Schofield from Coast Dog Aviation, I used to write some articles for him when he produced the Canadian Aviator magazine. And I started writing the articles that I said, look, I got some stuff that'd be interesting. I just wrote it down in letter form and sent it to him. And I always thought that editors and magazines rewrote it themselves. And he said, no, I like the way you write. I'm just going to use it the way it is.
Cool.
He said it's like sitting in a bar with a beer in your hand talking to you. And so I thought, okay, well, that's an interesting concept that, I'll try and keep that in mind when I'm writing stuff down. And so when I got this done, I was talking to him on the phone that it turns out he's still working, doing stuff. He's 96 years old.
Oh, wow.
And he lives down on Main Island. So he said, send me the manuscript. And so he was the one that helped me put it in. And again, by then I knew that you had to do all the typing yourself, all the corrections. He went through stuff, made suggestions, and he doesn't like to talk on the phone. So everything was by email. I would prefer to phone somebody and email back and forth. But
I'm the same way.
Anyhow, that's how we did it. And there's a few typos in it that people have pointed out to me and stuff. But that comes from it would be easier if we could have sat down at a desk across from each other. And some of it could be that at 96 years old that, that he remembers things a little differently now.
Yeah.
But anyhow, he had the connections to get it printed and everything else. So that's how I got from where I was at to where it is. The next thing that I had to deal with is that to have a book that you can mail to anybody, it can't be any thicker than that. So to get the amount of words, I would have rather have had it a regular sized book. I like reading them that way better than these wide ones.
Yeah.
But to get the amount of words in it that I had, I needed to go with this size. And it can't weigh more than 500 grams.
Oh, really?
At 500 grams, I can mail that anywhere in Canada for $5.75. I said, well, who cares about that, Jack? He said, well, most of them that you sell, you're going to be mailing them. I said, so what if it costs $6? He says, it doesn't work that way. It goes from $5.75 to $20.
Oh, really?
So at $20, you'll never sell any of them with a $20 mailing thing. So now I had to take 15,000 words out of the book because we had too many pages.
Huh.
And I wanted to keep the pictures in it that I wanted in it, and I wanted them in color. So now we had to go to special paper that was thinner because it's lighter, but you couldn't have the pictures bleed through.
Oh, man. So there's some things there was a learning curve there. Have you thought about doing a second book?
I got some notes that I'm working on because I got all the words that I took out of the first one, which actually ended up being the last couple of chapters. After I basically retired from commercial flying, when I retired from Sky Service, where I got the model and all that from. So commercial jet flying, when I said that's it, I'm retiring from it. I thought in retirement, once I got all set up here, I'd still like to ferry airplanes. So if you buy an airplane and you need it moved from wherever it's at to wherever you want it to be. So I did a bunch of that for the last 10 years.
Well, how long have you been retired for?
12 years now.
Oh, wow. That's a hell of a good retirement, isn't it? You enjoying it?
Yeah, well, actually, as somebody pointed out, basically what I did is went from a full-time paycheck to working here, there, and all over the place. But I don't ever see retirement as being sitting on the porch in my rocking chair that when there's things to do. So,
yeah, that's what we envision. I think that's the envision everybody has when they say retirement. You're just going to sit around. But I'm sure that's attractive for the first little bit. You always got to have something going on to try and keep you interested and stimulated. Otherwise, what do you do with yourself?
Yeah, well, probably the hardest part of that is trying to manage it. It's almost like opening Pandora's box as soon as you do it. That you think, well, I'll just do this flight and I'll do that flight and a little bit over here and a little bit over there. And next thing you know, you get people phoning you up, can you do this? And now the airplane's not ready on the day that it's supposed to be. And my buddies up in Fort Simpson that I've helped them out quite a few times over the last bunch of years, either gone up there to train pilots, go to places around the country to buy airplanes and ferry them up there for them. So it's been interesting, all right.
Well, especially with how you said the industry now went from you had to pretty much fight and pay for flight time to where now the pool of talent isn't there, and so the demand for the workforce is huge, and now they're going to be called. Of course, I mean, I don't blame them for calling somebody who has all that kind of experience already.
Well, and I mean, here I am going on 73 years old, and I got people phoning me up again here trying to invite me to come to work for the summer, and that I still have my commercial pilot's license, my airline transport rating, and stuff like that. And but from that point of view, I don't want a Monday, a 7-day-a-week job. That I still want to be able to do the stuff I want to do in the summertime.
Yeah.
And,
for sure. Enjoy life.
Yeah.
Especially where you live. It's beautiful out here. Did you find though that writing a book was able to kind of categorize and organize, what was in your head? Like it was forced you to put it down into a bit of more of a methodical kind of progress, and that
well, again, just going through my logbook, that I'd sit and go through them. A lot of it I can remember, but you go through and you come to a line. I remember that flight or some memorable thing about it, and but you can't put them all in there. That I had to be able to get it all in there in 230 pages, right? Yeah. So you sometimes had to look at it and say, how am I going to put this down, or how's it going to look when it's on paper? So
what do you have to say I'm sure you get asked this all the time now. We're talking about the workforce changing. People who want to get into this now in flight, there's a passion, a curiosity, even just with aviation, and how the industry is now, and then of course, culture and everything that, is going on right now. What would you say? Okay, you have an interest in aviation. How do you get into it?
Again, like the people you talk to, they've tried a lot of different ways. Some people start in air cadets. You can go a long way with that group, and plus it looks good on your resume if you were in air cadets for several years to people looking at resumes. And you probably would find out if you're going to like it and like the labor and intense involved in it, because if you get into their program where you do the glider flying and stuff like that, it's all done as a team effort thing, right? But other than that, you probably better really like it. In the case of my my brother's daughter, like she went to college in Castlegar and took the 2-year aviation course, but that's expensive, so you need to have upfront money to do that. That probably close to $50,000, if not more now. I'm not sure what the rates are.
Well, talking with a buddy who's, just wanting to get into it, and it's, I think, a private license. You're looking at about 20 to 21,000.
Yeah. And
a year, roughly. I think it's 300, roughly around $300 an hour is what he was saying, because you got $85 for the instructor, and then it was like 200 and something an hour for the plane and everything else. Yeah. So you're rounded to $300 an hour.
So you're going to be probably closer to $100,000 by the time you get a license nowadays, I would say. So
wow,
commercial license.
Commercial.
Yeah, I mean,
sheesh.
again, in 1971, you could do it in 35 hours flying time. So those are roughly half dual hours with an instructor and half solo practicing the stuff that you needed to do.
What do you think? Where do you think the pay structure is now for commercial flights? Like, okay, let me kind of build out that question a little bit. I flew down here on WestJet, and I was really curious whether that should have been. I was questioning it because WestJet had put out their 72-hour notice for
Their
going
strike
on a
notice,
strike.
yeah.
So I was like, well, I mean, the hell with it. I mean, it's there. I paid the money, so I come down, and Friday, which was yesterday, they decided to work something out. Now I know the core part of it from what they're saying on the news is, I guess, pay structure, especially in comparison to their peers, whether it be Air Canada or wherever else. But having said that, with $100,000 investment to try and actually get it into that level of just starting out into that career, what are your thoughts on like the pay structure and then of course maybe tie in what just recently happened with WestJet? What's your opinion on that? Do you really side and feel, I guess, where their perspective was and saying, okay, guys, we need a little better pay with our industry?
Yeah, well, for anybody that spent that amount of money and just got themselves a license, like right now, I know if you got enough experience, so say you've got that commercial license and you've gone out and worked either for the courier people or doing whatever you can do to get that first 1,000 hours of flight time, and you get hired on by Air Canada today, that you start at Air Canada at $50,000 a year, and you're going to have to live in either Vancouver or Toronto probably, and two most expensive places in Canada.
For $50,000
for $50,000 a year. For 4 years, you're frozen at that. So they're trying to get their wage scale structure up also. The WestJet guys, they were looking, I don't know what their pay scale is at, but that company started at it wasn't a family company, but it almost ran like a family company in the beginning. The pilots got on there and they had shares in the company, and if you worked hard and made it all work, everybody was going to make money. And it worked in the beginning, but when they sold it to Onyx or whoever owns it now it's just a commercial airline company. And, then they got a union in there, and that pilots started looking, and Delta Airlines in the States and some of the other big airlines, they're having a hard time finding talent down there. So now Canadians can go down there and work. They'll help you get a green card to come down. They're inviting you to come down there. So, and they pay 40% more than the Canadian companies do in U.S. dollars.
40%. That's huge.
So,
wow.
Suddenly, these guys like WestJet started looking and saying, hey, that if we want to move to Dallas, and we could probably buy a house in Dallas way cheaper than you're ever going to buy one in Vancouver, but or wherever they want to live. I'm not sure how their commuting scale works down there, but it's putting some stuff in the industry that I'd never seen in my whole time in it before this. Like you say, that in the case of that WestJet thing that just happened, that the pilots dug in their heels and said that, look, we're prepared to go on strike.
Yeah.
And I don't think WestJet's a big enough company that they could afford to do that for very long. That, because if the pilots are on strike, nothing stops the whole place, nothing happens.
Yeah, and obviously if the workforce is already stretched out thin enough, it's not going to be all that easy just to replace any one of them.
Yeah, so what it's going to start doing, I think you'll see probably, there'll be a domino effect on it. The airline prices will go up. These cheap flights, that to start out with, the people operating the flights want to get paid a decent amount of money. So if either up till now, the company's either been making a lot of money, I don't know, because they haven't been paying their staff that high, or it allows them to keep lower rates. But and that's the other thing you see happening with the airlines too. Like WestJet started off as a low-cost carrier, right? No frills.
Yeah.
Basically carry your baggage out to the airplane, and which is fine. I prefer it that way. That's how we
exactly.
did it up north all those years, right?
Yeah.
But then for some reason they started their own low-cost carrier Swoop, right? That is back down basically to that level of service. We're basically operating a bus in the sky, and so anytime they do that, they want to pay those pilots less. That happened when Air Canada started all of the Jazz flights and stuff like that. The lower tier operators, that we pay the pilots less and everything else, And
When WestJet first started, I remember, like you were saying earlier, they were extremely well paid because they had shares in the company. So, I remember in the newspaper. And having said that, sometimes it could be misleading, but for the most part, in the newspaper, you remember hearing some of the pilots becoming millionaires because they were on at an earlier stage and they had shares, and there was the advantage of being able to grow with the company.
Yeah.
Now, not so much anymore, eh?
no, they did.
Is that you or me?
No, it's not me.
Oh.
They did away with the program of that, and you're right. So then, I don't know whether that's. I think the flight attendants were the first ones to go unionized with WestJet, and then the pilots. But for the longest time, for the first 10 or 15 years, anyways, they tried. They were successful to keep the union out of there, right? So at one time, that a lot of the guys I worked with, the young guys, ended up going to WestJet, and to get hired on at WestJet, somebody at WestJet had to know you already to know if you were the right kind of person to fit in and do what it took to make the company go.
Career through invite.
Yeah, and if somebody didn't know you, you weren't going to get hired there because they weren't going to take a chance on getting somebody in there that was going to instigate a union, right?
Yeah.
So.
What is it about the union then that, especially in the, aerospace industry? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? What is your perception on that?
I don't really know, to tell you the truth. I've never been in a union, so I've always had to work and produce and get the job done, and that's the way I like doing it. That I don't like the fact that with the union, if you got somebody in there that's dead wood, that they get protected. That they can say, "No, we're not doing the job today. Our union contract says we only got to do this." And I would almost think that because this went on so long at WestJet, that the management and the pilots are definitely going to look at each other like that now. That one's going to be holding up the union contract and knowing every word of it, and it's unfortunate. I don't think that makes for real happy working conditions myself. But.
No, and we don't have to digress too much into the union, but I like to touch on it a little bit because the union has, I think, pros and cons, definitely. I think seems to me like it had a really good, more applicable place in the past when, the employees were definitely being taken advantage of. And it seems like now it's kind of actually done the exact reversal where it protects. I think it protects people for not being accountable or applying themselves the way maybe they should. Now there's definitely an argument for each one of those sides, but it's interesting to get people's different perspectives on it because it seems like now more of the cases where there's a grievance or there's a reason, there's energies being spent on not having to do quite as much, right? And then kind of be able to go with the flow.
Yeah. And I think that we're getting the whole world watered down that way more all the time. That as a kid growing up in the 50s and 60s, like I say, my dad was an ex-military guy, so there was that level of discipline around, and that's the way you did things around the house. That's the way work ethic started, and basically over the years that we're dumbing it down a little bit more all the time in every direction that I can see. That even to the point now that everybody seems to be having a hard time finding people that want to do any type of a job at all, right? That I don't know what they're all doing, but yeah.
Well, do you think, though, that it seems like everybody has, I think, obviously a strong interest with safety, and that's not to be compromised or disputed. But sometimes the application of safety could almost kind of be a little bit more stifling, that creates opportunity for things that shouldn't happen to arise. And
yeah, because people can throw anything out there as a safety problem, right? I mean, even getting out of bed in the morning could be a safety problem because you could trip over the first thing you come to, right?
Yeah.
So, from that point of view, if you don't do anything, it's going to be perfectly safe. But,
well, have you seen that change, over the years in the aviation industry? Like, the aviation industry has got a reputation of like the highest standard of safety and accountability and procedure and process, which I think has served a very good, its purpose very well. But do you see a tipping point of where now the way it's managed or the application or implication in it could be refined a little bit?
I think they're making it safer all the time. I mean, like, they keep studying it. Anytime something happens in the world of aviation, they analyze it to find out what the cause was and try to mitigate it ever happening again, right? And in the time that in my whole career in it, I've seen it steadily move along. The way that they analyze weather on the coast here for the float plane operators and everything else that goes along with it. So, and I think the safety point of it, and now it's getting more and more automation, right? Like the next level of people operating the big airplanes, even little airplanes for that matter, that are going to be people that are just operating automation, because automation can operate it better than you can, right?
Yeah. Well, I know there was an example of touching on the safety part in your book. There was an executive in one of your Lear jets that was riding along, and you wanted to make a landing, and it was just way too fogged in, and so you decided to go elsewhere. And that executive kind of said, "Well, no, let's give her again." And so you said, "Well, you just sit down and look out the window and watch this." And you got to, I forget how far it was, 400 feet or whatever the number was that you said in the book. And yeah, sure enough, you weren't able to land. And later on, I think he had come back and said, "Well, typically you can squeeze out an extra 10% efficiency out of anybody." And the response that you had was, "Well, not in the aviation world, eh?" And I think that was, a pretty a good point to make. There's I think a certain standard and a judgment call, and when you get to that point, that's sometimes where a lot of the issues rise. And I thought it was interesting because that extra 10%, I think, has value in certain applications when it comes to being able to achieve or accomplish something. But in other areas, in the situation you were explaining, that 10% probably was pushing the boundaries in an area of opportunity, of risk versus reward, or just flat out failure. It's just a matter of time. It's just we don't know when, right?
And I'd heard that statement actually a couple of times in my career, that the first was from a logging manager that figured we could put more in an airplane because logging equipment, a yarder, for instance, could yard 10% more than the book said that it was capable of doing without anything breaking, apparently. And
safety factors. Yeah.
The second one that you were talking about there, that that was an oil executive that in a big company that told me that he believed that they'd done studies that every worker had 10% more to give than they were given. You just had to squeeze them a little to get it out of them.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, "Well, that's not the case here. I mean, we're doing the job to the very best we can for you." And those instrument approaches they've got a lot of safety built into them, but you can only approach the ground without being able to see it to a certain level, depending on what kind of approach and equipment you're doing it with. And yes, in that case, we were down to 400 feet and couldn't even see a glimpse of the ground. And you know, it wouldn't matter how many times you did it; it's not going to make the sky magically clear up, right? Then.
I found in situations like that, the outcome typically is where, you know, it's kind of satisfying. It might kind of be able to, it could be perceived as you being able to, you know, do your job or cut above the rest in certain cases, and until it becomes a little bit more of a normal expectation. And then you're operating within that extra 10%. And, you know, you hit maybe what we were talking about earlier as far as complacency. And then all of a sudden, you know, it just takes that one time. And now every successful run before that doesn't mean a damn thing when something goes wrong. And at the end of the day, it was your fault. You're the one who shouldn't have been able to do it. But then pushing that boundary and that 10%, typically, if you're working out in the gym, that might be where the results are. But when you're in an application like what you're talking about and you're pushing the boundaries of safety or ability or just increasing the chances of something to go wrong, you're in the wrong area. It's just a matter of time. We just don't know when it's going to actually happen. And that's a bad place to be operating.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the things you got to watch with the corporate airplanes, that the people that own them have lots of money. They've probably been used to taking chances. That's maybe how they manage to pull off some of their deals, and that they want to do what they want to do. And I was lucky in the last few years of my career that I was to the point that it was quite easy to say we're doing it my way or we're not doing it at all. So, yeah, they respected that. I mean, you had to tell them, look, here's the reason we're not doing it. That, you know, we want to have equal takeoffs and landings here, but they are, people with money are good at pushing for what they want.
Well, yeah, I would have to agree with that also.
Yeah.
So just starting to wrap things up, I guess, out of all the different aircraft, out of everything that you had done, what is, you know, a little bit more of one area that you gravitate to? What do you prefer? Do you prefer the Lear jets and the experience of going international? Did you like the challenge of maybe smaller float plane, bush experience, or rotary, you know, helicopter kind of application?
I've been asked that lots of times. That I liked it all. That it depended more on the job you were doing, the type of work you were doing with the airplane. Like you say, that all of these are just machines to move people from point A to point B. That helicopters typically go up and down mountains in BC. That's people only use a helicopter when there's no other way of doing it. Like if you can't physically climb up there and get your stuff up there, well, you get a helicopter to haul it up there, and because they're expensive. And the same with the corporate jets, that they're expensive also, but people use them because their time and timing is valuable. So you know, with that Citation 10, we could get halfway around the world in 16 hours. So, you know, you get up today and tomorrow morning you'll be at your meeting in Dubai, for instance, from Calgary. That
Wow.
The float planes, I mean, I love them. There's lots of days, you know, you look at it, the weather's nice. Some of the nicest flights I've had in float planes that come to mind, that a corporate outfit I was working for, that they would have a board of directors meeting up on the Queen Charlotte Islands, and to fly all of the people into the fishing lodge we were going to, that we took our Twin Otter, that one on amphib floats up there. And so I just flying it up there empty, so that I took my wife Louise with me, and you know, that you get a beautiful sky blue day like this, and fly up the Queen Charlotte Islands. You could look out the window and say, it's hard to believe they're paying me to do this. You know, so all points of it were satisfying. And on the other ends of the scale, that there was plenty of days that that you're out there and the weather is not nice, the winds are high, and you know you're looking at it saying it's definitely work today, but you know it's work, but not as bad as say somebody hauling sheets of plywood up a ladder and putting them on the roof of a house in the pouring rain.
Yeah. That's true. That's definitely true.
Which oddly enough is how my son got into it, because like I say, he was in Air Cadets as a kid growing up. He'd flown with me on airplanes since he was about 2 years old. We got a picture of him sitting on my knee. But after, you know, so he got his private license and his commercial license while he's still in high school because we had an airplane, and he was interested. But after school, he went to work as a carpenter with a framing company because he wanted to stay living in Ladner, and he liked mountain biking. And that one day he was hauling sheets of plywood up a ladder to a roof in the pouring rain, and said, "What am I doing here? You know, that I think I'd rather be flying on a day like this." So he came home and said, "I'm going to go to the bank, borrow enough money to get my instrument rating." And he did that, got his instrument rating, went to Fort Simpson, and never looked back.
Wow. Well, out of all of those, we kind of touched on some of the stories, and you definitely talked about it in your book. But what is one of the most memorable? Like, is there an experience or a story that we can try and tell that?
One of the most memorable flights that I've ever had, that I would have to say it was late in my career, that I did a complete round the world flight from Calgary to Calgary, and I think we did it 25 days or something like that. It was a guy and his wife wanted to do a round the world flight, and including Australia and New Zealand, and that we did that, all of the various countries that we hit on that. You know, the interest of planning that flight, getting it all to work out, getting the overflight permits, the stuff I talked about earlier, and stuff that I would say that it's right up there with one of the more memorable ones.
Yeah, I can imagine. Has the world become a smaller place because of your ability to be able to fly?
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, in my mind, the way I think of it, anyways, that again with that Citation 10, that we had a very good upper wind blowing one day, and the company I was flying for at that time, we were going from Vancouver to Toronto, and we took off Vancouver. By the time we leveled off out over BC and we're heading across Alberta, talking to air traffic control in Edmonton, the guy said, "Wow, that's some kind of wind, you guys." He said that I'm showing you guys grounding at over 700 knots, so 700 nautical miles an hour. And I looked down at our computer, said, "Yeah, that's about what we're showing too." And so he said, "If I was to give you a direct somewhere, where would you want to go?" And I said, "How about flying intersection? It's just out of Toronto. It's the arrival for there." And so he got back and he cleared us direct to there, and he said, "Just out of curiosity, what's your computer say for your arrival time at that intersection?" And so I had to speculate that these ATC guys had a bet on going what our time from wheels off to wheels on in Toronto was going to be. That we did that flight 3 hours 24 minutes.
Wow.
So that makes the world a smaller place.
Yeah, no kidding. It has, I think, for most everyday people, the ability to, for like what I just did, fly from Fort St. John down to here and go back, versus, you know, the alternative is quite literally a huge, massive driving day, if not two. Yeah.
I was going to say, I've never done it in one yet.
I've done it in one from Fort St. John down to Vancouver, but I haven't actually included it in one day to go over the ferry. And then like, let's say to Nanaimo, Fort St. John to Nanaimo in one day would be, my daughter is later on coming down to Nanaimo later on this year. And they plan on doing it all in one shot. And I'm like, I don't think that is one hell of a trip, you know, I mean, unreal. But, you know, hour and a half from Fort St. John to Vancouver is a flight. And I think when I was in Victoria, before all said and done, inside of 4 hours, I went from Fort St. John Airport to the Victoria Airport. I mean, that's a massive savings in time.
Yeah, again, earlier in my career when I flew for the telephone company, like, you know, it wouldn't be uncommon to go from Vancouver to Fort St. John and back a couple of times a day. So,
wow, unreal.
Yeah, and those were airplanes that typically did about 450 knots. So, yeah, it makes the world a smaller place, and then you kind of know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And, one of the last trips I did up to Fort Simpson, flying to de Havilland Beaver on straight floats from here to there, you're looking at 10 hours basically in a line going straight north. So takes you up from here to Fort Nelson and Fort Nelson to Fort Simpson. And you got to land at a couple of lakes in between there to dump some fuel into the thing as well.
One of the things that I remember seeing on another documentary was from an astronaut. He was a Canadian astronaut, but one of the things he said was that flying has an uncanny ability to make what you would consider your home a lot bigger. And his example was when you're born, your whole world is that room. And then as you're growing up, there's different stages where your neighborhood now is as big as your world is. And then now you consider a certain town your home. And then when you're an adult and you move around, it becomes from a town to maybe a province or even a country. And that astronaut went and was in space and was looking down at Earth. And he went, man, my world is, planet Earth. And it made all of those other little parts that seem so big at different parts of his life seem so small. And flight probably has a weird way of putting things into perspective that way, right? I mean, you probably are looking at like the North American continent as home now, not so much maybe just a town or a street you live on. Yeah,
well, and even like relatively slow airplanes, the one that I have nowadays that's my own, that I end up going over to Vancouver quite a bit to Boundary Bay or Delta, and it's 20 minutes away. I drive out to the airport, hop in that airplane, and it only goes 110 miles an hour. But 20 minutes you're on the mainland and go about doing your business all day long. Hop in it. 20 minutes later you're back here again. Roll it into the hangar, close the door, and it makes the world a smaller place. As you know, the ferry, you got to get there an hour before departure time.
Yeah.
And that's only if you made a reservation to be sure that it's actually going to go. Then 2 hours on the ferry and, another 15 or 20 minutes to get off the thing. So it's half a day just to go one direction on the ferry, right? So,
yeah. I took the ferry out yesterday. It's a little bit of I enjoyed it because I don't hit the ferry all the time, but I could see how that would be. Nobody really, I think, travels to the mainland too often after probably a good dozen or so trips on the ferry.
No.
Shy away from it. Well, anything you want to maybe wrap up on before we, touch on maybe that we didn't elaborate?
No, just I would say to anybody that, if you got an interest in flying, it's well worth pursuing. It has been in my lifetime anyways.
Yeah.
It's not easy to get into. Like anything that any good things in life, it's not easy to get it happening. But once you do get there, it's well worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to do a few shout outs and we can both share this opportunity to kind of throw, some acknowledgements out there. The first one I would like to try and do a shout out to is to Matt Sager. He's the person who made this connection between the two of us and resulted in us being able to meet and do this recording. So big shout out, Matt. I do appreciate it. And then, of course, we did a recording that I highly recommend if anybody's watching this right now to go back and pick up on that, because he's part of the Discovery Channel Lost Car Rescue, and they do a bunch of recording up in our neck of the woods. So that's pretty cool.
And oddly enough, when you talk about Matt Sager, I met him because I taught him how to fly a float plane. I taught his brother how to fly a float plane, and I taught his dad how to fly their Cessna 185. So,
oh wow,
that's actually it was the other way around. I met the father first, and then his brother, and then finally Matt himself. But
pretty interesting people, and it's almost, I think, it's a small family, isn't it? The world of aviators. You seem to know everybody. We should almost maybe throw a shout out to Louise, your wife. You know, I think you mentioned in this book here, this one right here. I'd like to point out at the front. I'd kind of mentioned the forward and the introduction, but what you also did too was very interesting. Was you had your wife Louise do a little bit of where is it here? A little bit of an overview from her perspective, also, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's actually at the end of the book. But
is it at the end?
It started out as a
you're right.
An article back in the days that when I was writing for the Canadian Aviator magazine. That she said that all the stuff that she read in there was stuff from a pilot's point of view, and she thought that it was time to put perspective in there from a wife's point of view.
That's a really good idea. You know, I mean, it's not very long, but we touched on it earlier because when it comes from aviation, it puts a lot of, this is any profession, but I think aviation specifically because it puts you're flying around. It puts you away from the homestead and the moving around requirements too, right?
Yeah, she was the one that was there that taking care of the kids. Lots of the jobs I did, you were away for 6 or 8 weeks at a time. As you know, when you live in the north, when the furnace quits, what do you do? That if they let the oil tank run out, she knew how to bleed the pump on the furnace to get it lit up again, and knew how to heat up the car, and all the stuff that you need to know to live.
Very independent.
Yeah.
One more thing. Are you ready for one more thing I want to do? I forgot to mention, we were going to look at Google Map. We're talking about the world being a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
I want to take a look at the map here and just kind of go over a few things. Oh, did I lose it? Oh, I didn't lose it, did I? Boom. Haha, here we go. So in this here, this is where we're at on the island. Right in this area. Now up over here, these marks are kind of where I live. This is the neck of the woods. So this is BC here. Now when you first started in aviation, you were talking about Whitehorse and some of these northern regions that you're flying in. That's in this area here.
Yeah, I learned to fly in Whitehorse.
And then how far north did you end up going? It sounded like in the book you're talking about surveying really far north up in this region here.
No, way further north than that, north of Resolute Bay. So just keep coming over to the right and a little higher yet.
In this area?
So one of the places I talked about was Prince Patrick Island, which
in this area
is up
here?
in there. Yeah, and
is this still BC or Canada?
Yeah, you're still in Canada. Yeah, and as far up there as Eureka. So
oh, that's unreal. This is crazy. It puts that thing going back, putting things into perspective. We see Lower Mainland, and this is Vancouver Island here. And then right here, this is a huge part of where I think most people think, like where I am in Fort St. John is about as far north as people realize. You've got, I don't know how many times that to the top of Canada here.
So what we were doing up there, we were surveying, so we were photographing all the ice in the Northwest Passage to see if they could get LNG tankers up to Melville Island, where there was a lot of oil exploration going on. And now with global warming happening, that's become a lot more wide open up there. But in the early 1970s, that we photographed that ice in the spring, through the breakup, through summer, and through the fall freeze up, and we did it all out of Resolute Bay. And
Resolute Bay, let's see where that is.
And there's a nice summer day there. You can see like those icebergs. That's about as open as that ever gets.
Wow. That's about as open as it gets. Like in the middle of summer.
In the middle of summer, yeah.
So let's zoom out here and see where we are. Holy man, that's a little ways up there. So this is where you lived and stayed
Yeah.
year round?
Well, just for that contract for the spring, the summer, and the fall, that was enough.
So where did you're talking about Dubai. We should almost put that on the map and see how far Dubai is.
Yeah, so you're gonna.
Okay, let's share this now too. Boom. So this is Dubai, right in this area. Is that place as amazing as people think it is?
Yeah, I would say it is when you see the money spent on the place. All right, that oddly
so it's
enough,
right below Iran.
that I was taking engineers down there. We were having a drill ship built or overhauled there. Is why we were going there.
There's Russia. Russia's such a massive.
So to do that flight, we'd leave Calgary, and we'd go from Calgary to Keflavik, Iceland,
Keflavik.
right over here.
Okay.
And then from Keflavik to Moscow, just for fuel, and Moscow to Dubai.
Wow. That's unreal. So is that the furthest you've been is Dubai?
What, in one day or?
No. I guess you said you went all around the world.
Went all
from
around
Calgary
the world.
to Calgary.
So we started from Calgary on that trip. The first leg of that trip, we went from Calgary to Iqaluit, Northwest Territories, just for fuel because the weather wasn't very good in England. We were going into Luton, England to drop Tom Jones, the singer, off.
Wow.
Then from there, we were heading down off of, just trying to remember where we went to on that. It was down off of Spain anyways for a couple of days. From there up to Rome, then to northern Italy after that. And then worked our way all the way across several other stops to Japan. From Japan, we went down to Australia to New Zealand back up to Hawaii, and Hawaii back to Calgary.
Wow. Unreal. In this part here, I'm looking at, like, when you're going through Dubai and this airspace here, you got North and South Korea and China and, some country, Russia, some countries here. Did you have to be careful on how you navigated?
Yeah, on one of the
some
flights we did there that our routing through China, they forced us to a lower altitude and fuel became a problem. We were going to Osaka, Japan, and it worked out, but it put a lot of stress on fuel calculations there. That the routing also, we had to go a little further south of North Korea than we'd planned on as well. That all these little things you don't think about in the beginning of the flight that come up as you go along that you got to deal with. Yeah.
Cool. Right on. Well, I could keep going here. I could probably pick out another few questions and everything else, but we should wrap it up. Any last comments or words?
Nope.
Terry?
That anybody wants to find out more about it, you could always read that book.
Of course. Okay, the book. Where do you get it? Where do you get this book?
Oh, the easiest way to get one is to email me at xnwtpilot@hotmail.com with your name and address and $46, and I'll mail you one. It should get to you in a couple of days.
No other way to get it?
There's a couple of sites. The Canadian Aviation magazine has it on there, but you get hold of them and they get hold of me anyways.
Oh, okay.
They all get shipped from here anyways. So.
What we'll do that it seems to work actually fairly effectively is I'll get that link from you.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the show notes. Anybody who wants a copy of this book, just look in the show notes. If you're watching this, it's going to be pretty easy to find where the show notes are. And email Terry and go from there. It'd be an e-transfer, I would imagine.
Yeah, I do them. That's
payment?
the easiest way too, yeah.
Okay. Well, right on. I appreciate it. Let's wrap it up. And thanks for your time.
Thank you.
It was a good one. Take care. Bye, guys.